she was at the American Jewish Historical Society in New York, which is an awesome place. And you just, out of curiosity, said, let me look at this? Or what?
Well, I was actually researching the topic that's turned out to be the topic of the book I'm writing now.
Ah.
And it was because I was looking for some sort of evidence to confirm these other rumors that I was interested in, that I asked for the executive committee meeting minutes, because I thought if there was any sort of evidence that they had really discussed these other things, it would be in there. And so I was looking for something else, which I didn't find. And instead, I started reading about how much they spend for band instruments, and I read about a bit of a syphilis problem among the orphans because they were teenagers. And then I read about this group of 8 children who were bald because of the x-ray treatments they'd gotten from a woman doctor at the Home for Hebrew Infants. And I just was so stunned. I didn't understand what was happening. Where were these x-rays? What were they x-raying these little infants for?
In fact, it was even more mundane thread than that because it was a request for a wig.
That's right, it was. It was
wigs?
it was
Wigs for?
the motion to purchase wigs for the children who are bald because of their x-ray treatments approved.
To which
To
your
which
reaction was, what?
What just happened? Yeah, that was my reaction. What just happened? So then, because it went over about 3 different months, 3 different meetings. They discussed this. The kids had been brought in, and the first discussion is like, what happened to them and who's responsible? And so they wrote to the infant home. And then the next meeting, they said, we got a letter from the infant home where Dr. Elsie Fox, who's an expert in x-rays and a graduate of Cornell Medical College, explained her research in a letter, which they did not include in the minutes, so I don't know what it was ever really about. And that the infant home agreed that they would take responsibility. And then the third meeting was, all right, we're going to buy them wigs and send them to foster homes.
But take responsibility in the sense that they could buy them wigs.
I
In other words,
suppose,
it was a limited,
yeah.
oh yes, now we understand, we'll buy them wigs.
right, like who's going to get charged
Doesn't
for
address
these?
the basic ethical question.
Well, and I think too, responsible for, if anything further occurred medically, what their needs might be.
Right.
But that's the last I saw it mentioned.
Huh.
So that's where it started. And it was just so strange and interesting that I wanted to pursue it.
And yet you wanted to pursue it. You teach at Shippensburg University.
I do.
So you could be classified as an academic. And you wanted to pursue
I
this
paid enough for the PhD. I'm still paying my student loan, so.
Well, but you wanted to pursue it in a fictional way as opposed to
Yes.
an article or a journal piece or something.
Yeah, I was doing the research because I thought I would do a sort of narrative historical nonfiction centered around my family history and using that family history story to tie together these various threads of American immigrant history. But once I read about
which quite a few writers have done within the past 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
So it's a really good structure for a story.
I thought so,
Yeah.
because in my family history we have, my great-grandfather was a contractor in the garment industry in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and exploited to some extent that resulted in a pregnancy, one of the girls who worked for him, and they lived in a tenement on the Lower East Side, and he ran off to Colorado because he got tuberculosis. I mean, it seemed like all these great historical moments could be put together. But when I read about this business with x-rays and woman doctors and bald kids, I was like, no, I want to imagine that because I want to be able to write a story.
Had you written short stories before that?
None that anyone else has ever read.
So they haven't been published?
No, they're unpublishable, really.
Okay.
I mean, nothing I ever... I think I tried to get one story.
So how much wonderful combinations of ignorance and courage does it take? Oh, I'll just write a novel about this.
Yeah, I'll just write a novel about this. I think a good combination of ignorance and courage, which I think is a character trait of mine, really. My dad, at the first of my failed marriages receptions, my dad told this story that he thought really exemplified my personality about how when I was, I guess it was summer camp, and I was taking my swimming test to swim in the deep end of summer camp Green Lake in the Catskills, except I couldn't swim. So I don't know why I was doing this, and I really could not swim. And the whole time I was swimming, the lifeguard was like hovering with that hook over me, right? Because they could tell I couldn't swim. But somehow I managed to like flail my way to the end. I think more because I was too embarrassed to get hauled out of the water. And my dad said, that's because she's so full of perseverance and courage. And I thought I was just too stupid to like stop because I didn't know what I was doing. So some combination of those two traits, I think you'd need to write a novel.
Yeah, what a perfect metaphor for fiction writing,
Apparently it is.
Yeah.
Especially the part where if you think at the end of that doc somebody's going to publish it, which is really insane. So
Right.
I just did it to see if I could stick with it and get it done.
Which you did.
I did.
And then you thought to yourself, now what?
Now what? So I got, the writer's market, and
Okay.
I wrote the beautiful query letters, and I would like research agents and get books that they had represented and read those books so I could refer to them in my beautiful query letters that I put into nice little envelopes and sent to addresses that I think lead directly to paper shredders. Because nothing ever happened. And a couple places actually rejected it, which was helpful because at least then you could cross them off the list.
Yeah.
Some intern actually read it.
But then there was that twilight zone where you don't know what happened to your letter.
The twilight zone where you don't know, it just disappears. But you can't take it personally. Agents get hundreds of emails a day sometimes. I mean, it's insane. So
Even in the publication world, and this doesn't begin to cover the submission world or the consideration world, there's over 25,000 books published per month now
Wow.
in the U.S.
That's a lot.
Yeah. So and a lot of that has nothing to do with brilliant works of fiction or life-changing, books of advice. But at the same time, that gives the odds, which I sometimes have to explain to starry-eyed writers who come into the store and say, I have a great book, where do I get it published? And I try to encourage them, but you also have a little dose of reality there too.
It's very unlikely that something gets published, and I didn't think my novel was commercial anyway. I thought it was sort of maybe a fiction imprint of an academic press or a small press. I submitted it to Bellevue Literary Press, which is a branch of somebody gave a big grant to Bellevue Hospital to do something in the humanities. So they started a press, and they said no. And I sent it to Feminist Press of City University, New York. So that's really where I thought it might fit. And then when I met the editor from William Morrow, I was very surprised.
Was this like a social occasion or professional?
Yeah, it was. I went to a conference called the New York Pitch Conference in New York. And there again, I went because at my university, you only get funding for travel on the semester you're not on sabbatical. I had a sabbatical coming up. And I knew I couldn't travel at all during that semester. So I thought, well, I'll use my conference money. Where do I like to go to New York so I can do some research what's happening in New York. So I'm like Googling conferences in New York, writing conferences. And this thing came up, this New York Pitch Conference. And it was all about how to pitch your book, how you would learn how to sum up your book. So I was at 90,000 words at that point, and you have to get it down to 300.
Right.
And
it's the elevator pitch.
The elevator pitch.
Right.
And it's so daunting. So anyway, and I thought, well, I have this book I finished last year. It's sitting around in a drawer. I'll just send them a sample of that. Hi, come on in. And so I went to that conference, and as part of the conference, editors come and you can practice your pitch on them. And so that's when I met Tessa Woodward from William Morrow. I practiced my pitch on her, and she said, wow, I want to read that tomorrow.
Which is sort of like lightning striking.
Yes. Well, and it's the only time she's ever gone to that conference. She's never gone to that conference again.
Imagine the dread that editors have when they say, told by their companies, no, you're assigned to go to this conference. Yet, here she is, and she's thinking, oh my goodness,
and they, yeah, and you know, sometimes they hear things they're interested in. But you know, because I had it written, I mean, it wasn't what you've read. It was the rewrite is much better than the novel she bought, but I had it finished, as finished as I could make it. So I sent it to her the next day, and then they bought it 2 weeks later, which is also insane. So, yes, and then
Now, did we
I
hear you when
rewrote
you
it.
screamed,
Yeah.
or did you know? Was that just,
Oh
when did
no,
you first tell me that you had written a novel?
my mom told you.
Oh, that's right.
Like when my parents moved to Carla when they retired, and I'm like, you can't talk about me all over town. This is a small town, right?
Don't
I know
embarrass me,
people.
Mom.
I know
Yeah.
people. You can't be just like going on. Oh, my daughter, blah blah blah. So no, I came in the store and you said, I hear we're going to be selling your book soon. I'm like, oh, my mom must have been in here.
Was that about a year before it was actually published?
That would have been like October, November 2013.
That was the fall,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And it came out
I
August.
do remember that when she
15.
came in and said,
Mhm.
my daughter's written a book. And I thought, I rolled my eyes.
Yeah, it
Said,
hasn't everybody's thought
I'm
that.
sure she has.
Yeah.
That's right. And then she explained to me the reality, because your mother's very persuasive and forceful and charming. And, all of which traits, of course. And then I became extremely interested when she said it was HarperCollins. Because HarperCollins is not only one of the major publishers in the States, but a large part of my great fiction downstairs, including Harper Lee and a bunch of other people, are HarperCollins. And then I think she probably mentioned it to you, and that's when you had to come in and confess that you actually had.
No, I just walked in because I come to the bookstore all the time.
That's true.
And you were like, oh, you wrote a book.
So I was aggressive and picked it out. Okay.
That's how I remember it. It could that might not be the truth of things, but
It doesn't sound like you had a long period of, awful revisions. It sounds like you.
I settled in. No, because I had a meeting with Tessa in November 2013, and she's a fantastic editor for me. Like everything she says to me makes sense, and she gave me one steno pad, one side, tiny little writing of notes.
Huh.
And that took me until May of the next year.
2014.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because it was a really significant rewrite, and I had to do some more research. I still didn't understand how X-rays worked, so I just sort of, there was my orphan. She's like, the little Rachel disappears into this infant home, and like ... A year later, she comes out and she has no hair. And I'm like, I don't know what happened. I don't know. So I had to learn more about that. And that turned out to be a couple of the best chapters in the book, I think. And, she's like, we spend too much time here, we don't spend enough time here. And I restructured it and expanded sections. So it was a pretty significant rewrite. And I had a sabbatical that spring. So I committed myself to a deadline that I thought if I can't take advantage of the sabbatical and get this done, then that's silly, so.
Now, as all of you probably know, the classic tradition used to be in academia, when you take your sabbatical or you write a book, that's when you publish. And then it reduced itself over the years to you write an article and then you have it published and so forth. So what Kim actually did is going back to this classic model of you take some time off, you write a novel that becomes a national bestseller. Yeah, that's right. That hardly ever happens. Once again, you seem to have like blessings sprinkled across your path here. I mean, for all the hard work,
yes,
it's like a series of this is what happens when you work this hard. This is what happens when you work this hard.
Well, if you don't work that hard, nothing can happen. But it's not necessarily what does happen. If you don't spend 4 years at home by yourself writing your book, nothing can happen.
Right.
But chances are nothing will happen anyway. And my brothers and I aren't used to like happy blessings being sprinkled upon our family. So going back to this great grandfather who ran off and left his sons to be orphans. I don't know if that's where it started. Or my dad, when he was little, lived through the Blitzkrieg of Rotterdam.
Right.
So our family histories are not littered with like rainbow sprinkles.
Right.
Yes, so my brother and I were very suspicious. Like, what does this good fortune mean? Who's about to die? Like, what terrible thing is about to happen? And it took me a while to feel not nauseous, and sort of like, okay, maybe this will be nice.
In the spring of this year, you and I were quite excited at throwing a party for you in June.
Mm-hmm.
And then you told me, no, it's not going to happen. But that actually was good news.
It was good news, and it was funny because I came here, we were planning the whole June launch, and we had like a list and a meeting, and it felt very like official and bookstore-ish. And then when I left, I checked my messages on my phone, and one of them was, your publication date has been changed to August because it got picked as a target book of the month.
Which you could not tell anyone.
I was under orders. I didn't realize how strict it was because, again, I thought if I say anything, they'll like withdraw my contract and stop publishing my book.
And then your brothers will be right.
And my brother will be right. So finally, I told my editor, I said, I told my mom. She said, you can tell your mom. She's like, just don't like put it on the internet. So no, I was very scared. I was like, I can't tell you, Jeff.
So even from your local independent bookseller, said,
I know.
no party, but I can tell you why.
I can't tell you why.
Right.
So I don't know what you thought that was about.
Well, I had a feeling that your publisher had cooked something up,
Mm.
and I thought it was actually something as mundane as they're going to switch you to hardcover.
Mm.
I mean, I don't know, but neither did I understand why there would be a mystery about that.
Mm-hmm.
But the Target news was huge.
The Target news was huge, and it elevated the book to.
It may have changed the title.
It changed the title back. So we started. This was my title, Orphan with the number sign 8, after many stupid things,
Right.
Nurse Rachel at night. Or I don't even know.
Which was a porn movie at some point.
Yes. Now I'll never be able to not think about that. But then
it was spelled out when
yes,
you came to me and said, let's party.
I don't know, above my editor, above her editor at HarperCollins,
Yeah.
they thought if they spelled it out number 8, it would be more searchable or something. And I was sad, and my editor, who was on maternity leave, and not even answering emails, she called me and she said, it's okay. I was like, okay. But then Target had seen an early version somehow, and they said, oh, we like that. And William Morris said, okay. Back to number 8. And then Target said, her suitcase looks too new. So William Morris said, we'll throw it down the stairs and put dents in it. So that happened. And then her socks used to have lace on them. And I saw the cover with the notes back and forth, and it was like, delace the socks, because I guess they look too luxurious or something.
No orphan would have lace.
No orphan would have lace. And I guess the coat had at first come back from the art department red, and my editor said make it blue.
It's interesting that Target did not say a single word about content.
They were so cool with everything.
They were actually more
very
interested
cool with
in
everything.
packaging.
They thought their customers would like it. And they've promoted some fantastic books. A book whose title is now eluding me for a second. We'll come back to that.
You can imagine them when I go to Target, I really look at their book section. Except I went down to our local Target to make sure that Kim's book is there.
It kept getting sold out. Tell the Wolves I'm Home.
Oh, right.
Carol.
Yeah.
Carol something. Tell the Wolves I'm Home is a fantastic book where it's a sort of a young girl and her uncle is gay and dying of AIDS, and they published that, and it didn't
It's not that they published; they promoted.
They promoted it, and Dara Horn, you can buy her books at Target. So I've often been at Target and looked at the books and said, "Wow, this is a really nice selection of books."
And all these decisions are made on the national level, of course.
They have a panel of readers who read advanced copies of things. Right. So when Target picked it, they wanted us to hold off on the release date so that it would come out in August, because it was going to be the August book of the month, pick of the month for August.
Right.
Yes, and then all of a sudden it was getting marketed,
And then you can finally tell me it's sometime in early summer.
I don't know when I was allowed to tell
Right,
you.
and then we rearranged the date for the national launch date, which we had here.
Yes, on the Tuesday. Why do books come out on Tuesdays?
I have no idea. I've asked publishers this, and they tell me they have no idea either.
It's just the
Somewhere,
way it
someone
happens.
started this.
It's just how it's done.
Right. I think they need to get the books out early enough in the week so if there's any concurrent book reviews, as if book reviews matter anymore, which are always most influential on the weekend, that it'll be just ahead and it'll be available. And that's a completely speculative idea on my part.
Sounds like a good idea.
We had
As good as
150 people downstairs for
It was crazy. It was really hot.
It was really hot.
I was a little
We
afraid
had all
my
our air
mom was
conditioning
gonna
on. We
faint.
finally had to open the back door for fresh air. We
Yes.
had half the people there who could not hear a word, and yet they were as happy as the people in the other room who could hear a word.
And apparently there were snacks. I couldn't even see the snacks.
No, the snacks,
No.
yeah, the snacks were. We had
Yeah.
lots of great snacks.
It was a blur.
Lots of wine, and I guess that's why the people in the front room who couldn't hear you were happy because they had all the wine in the front room. And at that point, you started to travel.
I traveled a little bit, yeah. I traveled in August. I went to Los Angeles and did a reading at Book Soup. And then I traveled to Phoenix and did a reading at Changing Hands. So those were nice events. And then I've been traveling through various. I went to Pacific University in Oregon as a visiting writer as part of their writer series. And then I went to Denver through Jewish Book Council. And even before the book came out, I'd gone to New York to attend a book expo, and
Right.
I saw you there in your role as
I was
buyer
there.
of books, and I was
the
at a table as a writer of books.
Yeah, third person in line because everybody was running around with what's called ARCs, advanced reading copies of this, and actually by then they had real copies, I think. No,
they were still.
They couldn't have because this was May.
Yeah, it was only
So
May.
advanced reading copies, and everybody was running around like this, and I had to fight myself to not grab everybody and say, you know, she's here, and she's from Carlisle, and she teaches the Shivers. She's mine.
I
And,
know. I'm just gonna
but
be at my
anyway,
bookstore.
she filled up instantly this long line.
Well, they give the books away.
50, 60 people.
And it's pretty. So, you know, somebody stands at the bottom of the line holding up the book. It's like, if you stand on this line, you can get this for free. So Book Expo I'd never been. I just wanted to go to see what it was like. And you told me only rubes pay to go to Book Expo, and then I
She
should
thought
ask my
she had to
publisher. So I asked the publisher, can I just come to Book Expo? And they're like, yeah, all right,
Of course,
we'll get you to sign books for half an hour. And then the Target thing happened, and then they got very excited about it. So.
But there is, I mean, there's probably several hundred signings at this largest English language book convention in the world. But remember, it's several hundred signings of an industry that has 25,000 new books a month.
Mm.
So it is selective. It's not just everybody and their third cousin out there signing books. And it was tremendously exciting to wait until, I think it was on the third day.
Yeah, it was that last day, because you said you usually leave
Right.
sooner, and you delayed your train so you could get.
I mean, she is not Stephen King. She doesn't quite have the first day cred yet, but at the same time.
No, they have this sort of table set up with these like cattle chutes, and you just get online and get a free book, and
And you got to
But it
meet
was
other
fun.
neat authors.
that's been one of the most sort of unexpected and fun things about is that I get to meet other authors at Jewish Book Council, where you have 2 minutes to sum up your book to representatives of Jewish community centers and reading groups from around the country. There were 50 people in my group, 2 minutes each. And I was second to last. Somebody, her last name started with Z. So I
And
wasn't
Simon
that
Cowell
last.
was not there, but it was like that.
It was kind of like, yes, then they hold up signs like
Saying
37.
perfectly now.
Yes.
Yes, and that's
So,
what it
but in my group, so we're sitting alphabetically. So I got to meet B.A. Shapiro, who has a new book out called The Muralist, and I got to meet Sigal Samuel, who has a book out called The Mystics of Mile End, and you know, I met all these cool writers who were sitting next to me, and that was really neat. And at Book Expo, I got to meet writers, and at some of these events, I'm meeting people, and and it gave me the courage to put a panel together for a conference in April, where I just wrote to these writers who I really admire and said, hello, would you like to be on a panel with me about this? And they were like, okay. So it's given me a lot of courage.
I wanted to switch to a few questions about the book.
Okay. How are you guys doing? We're doing like an interview conversation.
Yeah, this is like that.
And then you can ask us
This is
questions.
like Actors Studio,
Yeah,
and I'm the annoying guy.
Don't ask me those creepy questions.
Right. No.
James Lipton.
James Lipton, thank you.
What's your favorite curse word?
You gave me a advanced reading copy back when it was numbered.
Yes.
And unlike all of your family and like all of your friends, I did not read it in 12 hours. I did not read it overnight.
You didn't read it overnight.
And I've never told you why. I just always explained, oh, I've got so many books to read. I'm just a slow reader. I want to give it the proper time. I gave you all these wonderful,
Yes.
evasive
Is there a
answers.
better story than that?
Well, there's a slightly different story.
All right, let's
Have
hear
all
it.
of you read the book? You don't have? Okay. I won't give anything away.
It's about an orphan.
Well, that's the key.
Okay.
The orphaning happens in the first chapter
Oh.
in an act of incredible, brutal domestic violence,
Sorry.
which I found extremely alienating.
Oh no.
I mean,
Yeah.
but it showed you I was already buying into the reality of your fictional world,
Okay.
that I took it seriously.
Okay.
And I thought, if the rest of the book is going to be like this, I'm going to have a very difficult time.
Oh.
Because there's children involved. I felt like I was watching a Steven Spielberg movie, because small children were in danger, there was incredible violence, and I thought,
Blood
oh no, it's such a sweet, gentle soul who handed me this book.
That's because you don't really know me.
And that's what I struggled with getting over
Aw.
that.
Sorry.
But about 50 pages into it, I clicked into the fact that I would actually be in the company of Rachel Rabinowitz, who's the orphan of the title. And Rachel is incredibly good company.
The grown-up one who talks to you?
Yes. And sweet and interesting and strong and complicated and a little gnarly and slightly eccentric, and for many, many great reasons that are perfectly understandable. And then all of a sudden I was rushing. I felt like you started off on a slow river, and then you begin to hit very interesting rapids, and then things just take you away. And I rushed to this absolutely perfect ending,
Oh.
which was astonishing. And
That was
as-
hard one.
after that, anytime that Kim came in, after her about 12th time of asking me if I had finished the book, I was able to burble to her. I was sort of incoherent as to how wonderful the book was.
You said nice things.
I did say nice things,
Yeah.
sincere things. The thing is, though, you've got a lot of different forms of violence in this book.
I guess so.
Tell me of all the different ways that you detect violence in your book.
I'll tell you about all the ways I detect violence in my book. I think a lot of bad shit happens to people, as we're especially reminded of this morning.
Yes.
And these are moments that you have to really figure out how are you going to integrate that into the narrative of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And can you still take control of the narrative of your life, even if it incorporates incidents over which you had no control? So that's an interesting thing to me. I feel like comparatively to some stuff I've read or things you see on TV, it's
a lot
really
of things you could find downstairs.
yeah, it's
right,
really not that bad. I don't think.
But you have human violence. You have domestic violence.
True.
You have people lying to each other.
I guess.
You have people who are utterly uncaring of the violence they're doing to others.
I think they don't see it that way.
Right.
You know?
And yet violence is done because kids go bald,
Kids go bald and
cancers develop.
yes, yeah, and in doing medical research on other people, that was very interesting. Another reason to do fiction instead of an article or a book, because in fiction you get to imagine with empathy what is the mindset of a doctor who says, "Oh, I've got a bunch of children here at this orphanage and no one to ask permission. I wonder if there's some other way to cure scurvy. I think I'll give them scurvy and then try stuff out on them and weigh them and measure them and take samples of their stomach acid and make charts and graphs and write articles about it. And how is that bad?"
Could this be connected to the fact that the experimental doctor had no children herself?
Well, the doctor that I kind of modeled her on was more Dr. Hess, who was a real doctor who worked at the Hebrew Infant Asylum, and
Right.
he did a book called Scurvy, Past and Present, and he did a lot of research on children. And so Mildred Solomon, no, Dr. Hess had children at home.
But Mildred does not.
Mildred does not, but
Okay.
I don't know that.
You know someone's going to analyze that in some future article on
It's-
orphan number.
I don't know. I mean, to me, that was more of just a professional choice, that she wanted to pursue her career, and that was more important to her than getting married and having a family, which would have distracted her from her career. So,
Do you think that she ever saw the orphans as human beings, or did she see them as test subjects?
I think you see them as human beings, and you convince yourself they're test subjects. That's what I think. I don't think Mildred Solomon is as bad as people read her, but I had
already
to
run
make
into
her
this,
up.
yeah.
So yeah, and then people ask me, why did you make this doctor a woman? It's like, well, that's what inspired me, was that there was a woman who was, in charge of an X-ray room, which was expensive and fancy in 1918. So that was really interesting to me.
You understand, though, how people will ask you that question and then hear your answer and think, oh, she's just deflecting the gender nature of my question. She's just saying, when you refer to history, it's an escape valve. You can escape from a question sometimes by saying, well, that's how it really was. I'm not making anything up.
Well, but if somebody said, why did you make that doctor a man? Like, nobody would bother to ask me that. So I think it's an interesting question.
Right.
That it was somehow this big decision on my part. I'm going to turn her into a female.
But in a sense, it's a question you can't answer, because you could just say, well, there's precedent.
Yeah. And I think that connection was much more dramatic and interesting.
Oh, very much. In the novel, it's tremendous. Yeah,
because what happens is Rachel's working as a nurse when she's an adult, and this Dr. Mildred Solomon, who experimented on her, becomes her patient.
Which is is the central...
I'll never come up with anything this high concept.
Yeah,
it's really sad.
It's the central dramatic tension in the book.
It is,
That
and
right
it's
there.
so easy to sum up.
Right. That's part of your elevator pitch.
This is why the thing I'm writing now is driving me crazy, because it doesn't do that. I don't think most things do.
But remember, please, for your own sake, that you didn't come up with your elevator pitch until well after you had finished the first draft of your novel.
That's true. I didn't even realize Mildred Solomon was the antagonist for like a couple of years.
Yeah, and it's a question of whether she sort of is or not.
I think she became, once I realized she was, then she became it more.
Yeah.
I thought Amelia was the big antagonist, who's another girl at the orphanage.
Yeah, that's right. She's sort of set up, but then she diminishes with what
Yeah, she's
becomes
just another kid.
Yeah.
But yes, Dr. Solomon becomes bigger and bigger. But yes, then that's such a cool situation, because we get to a point where Rachel has sort of figured out what Dr. Solomon did to her with these medical experiments, and there's Dr. Solomon who's like in her care and under her control, and so the two of them, and they end up like sleeping together in like literally, because it's a night shift and Rachel's tired and Mildred Solomon is like on morphine, so she's asleep and Rachel just sort of falls asleep, and so like this incredibly intimate space. I like putting people in little spaces. Apparently,
It is.
but it just
Yeah.
it just intensifies the dramatic conflict.
It is one of the great scenes, actually, because the reader is continually expecting a retribution, violence by Rachel, and actually it's directly threatened in a sense. But at the same time, Kim has this ability to take your expectation and make it tighter and tighter and tighter until you're flipping the pages faster than you had any thought that you could read, because you're
That's
waiting for
fun.
that retribution, and yet the retribution has these moments of incredible, strange tenderness, and you begin to get very wonderfully confused and intoxicated as a reader.
Well, that's because they're I was going to say it's because they're human people, but they're not. They're apparently they're made-up people.
But
Yeah,
they're dramatic truths.
And that really interested me. And that was something I didn't know if I could pull it off, but I was always trying to get to that point where Rachel would, like, how can you get a pretty basic regular person to the point where they could consider harming somebody else? And then how can you reel them back from that? And how can
Convincingly, persuasively.
One person wrote to me who read the book and said, that paragraph, that was my favorite paragraph. I was like, oh, I worked really hard on that paragraph. I worked really hard on it. And somebody else wrote and said, oh, that sentence about folding sheets was my favorite sentence. I was like, oh, I know which sentence you mean. But most people don't notice that. But yes, I was really trying to get to that moment and make those things happen, and it took a few drafts to get there.
And just to not let you off this implied or real violence hook, there's even also contemplated sexual violence in the trip to Colorado.
Oh, yeah, well, there's that boy in the orphanage.
Right.
And
With the uncle.
And the uncle. That's based on my great-grandma. Her dad married his daughter to his brother
And
to
so
keep
that's
the
where-
money in the family.
That's where that came
And I don't imagine it was sort of the first little interbreeding moment in my family line, because
So
my
you-
great-grandmother is colorblind, which is very unusual for women. This is a recessive trait, and it's usually, when you look this up, it's like an indication of inbreeding. So we come from some little village in Russia where there were maybe like 10 Jews, and maybe they were all cousins, and by the time we got to the United States, so I don't know. I'm not colorblind.
So you were settling
It's
some
dissipated.
scores here, in other words.
Where would these weird ideas come from? But yeah, so in a way, having those stories in my family history gave me permission, because otherwise it would have seemed like very sort of silent movie melodramatic. But I was like, yeah, I think I can do it.
I want, on behalf of all readers, not only the apparently tens and tens of thousands who have read your book, I want to thank you for being clever enough, smart enough, and true enough not to include a court scene in your book.
A courtroom scene.
Yeah.
Oh.
Do you realize that there's a lot of very shallow Hollywood executive producers who read your book and think, oh, where's the court scene? When does it add up that people yell at each other in court?
Oh.
And you didn't do it. You avoided this. Because, see, I can read a book and say,
Yeah.
she didn't do this. She
Oh,
didn't. And you
okay.
keep thinking, well, of course I had to do this, and of course I had to do this.
Courtroom scene, huh?
You did not take it to a case of public adjudication.
No.
All of your adjudication in this is private,
It's personal.
personal,
It's personal.
intense,
Yes.
intimate.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
more interesting, don't you think?
You didn't see that as a choice ever, though.
No, it never occurred to me that we could go to court for any reason.
So when the Hollywood producer comes to you and says, no, we got to change this to where Kate Blanchett screams at so-and-so, and you could say, yes, I'm fine with Kate Blanchett, but no, you can't have a court scene, and I want you to bring me along with you to say,
All right.
are you guys idiots? You can't
I
put a
can't
scene."
imagine how you could shoehorn a court scene into this book.
But this would be a case where Rachel brings in Dr. Solomon, tries or whatever. But that would be completely dishonest to the intimacy
Yes.
that is in the very first chapter.
Because some people who read it say, has anybody ever been sued? And I'm like, no, you don't really understand how
Right,
these
you sort of
things
look at them
work.
blankly, right, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just saying,
yeah.
you pulled off something that
Oh, good.
an obvious writer, a canned,
Mm.
pull it out of the script book writer would have put in, and you avoided that.
I'm thinking of the things I'm working on, and I don't think there's any courtrooms anywhere. So I may keep avoiding them and make you happy.
The other thing that everybody should know, especially Mulan, who has come up to investigate this, I know how fond you are of animals, and I know how you rely on them.
I do.
And I was teasing you that there are no animals in this book.
There's some mice. There's some mice, but they're in a cage in a lab somewhere. No, it was a strange oversight. I don't know why, people couldn't have had like a pet dog or a pet cat somewhere along the line. And I almost didn't realize it until I was all done. I was like, nobody has pets in this book? I don't understand. So the book I'm writing now has lots of animals. I was telling you, we have St. Bernards and Boston Terriers and parrots and monkeys and horses.
You've overcompensated.
I'm overcompensating. So if you like animals, read my next book.
And how does one, after this unexpected and astonishing success of this book, how do you get yourself up to it?
It's actually kind of hard because while this was languishing in my drawer, nobody was interested in it. I started something else, and I'm like 100,000 words into something else. They're not all good words, but there's a lot of words, and I thought that would be my next book. And when I was at Book Expo and I started to realize a lot of people might buy this and read it, then I thought I should probably make my next book more like this than the one I was working on.
You were attacked by sequelitis.
It's not really sequelitis,
No, I know,
but I just
yeah.
thought, if I read this book and I thought, I wonder what else this person wrote, I'd want there to be some connection. And so I went back to that topic I was originally trying to find out
The
when I
very first
discovered
one.
the x-rays. So and I have something in a drawer that's about, it's sort of 1970s, New York, upstate New York, Manhattan, with side trips to Amsterdam and South America that I'm very fond of and we'll get back to. And instead I went, sort of revived an idea that I had already sketched out. So the one I'm working on now is the same time period, and in fact it's the same orphanage, fictionalized version of the same orphanage, but it's really different, and it's more about, real estate. So we visit this orphanage, but it's in a very different way, and everybody's outside and they move all around. So
The orphanage no longer exists.
the orphanage that inspired this book does not exist anymore. It's a playground.
Except you're making it very real for lots and lots of people.
Yeah, so the book I'm working on now, the orphanage is in it, but it's really different. But I'm much more self-conscious. It's harder to write now because I get worried about it, and I get worried about I feel like people might actually read it. When I wrote that, I had no expectation anyone would ever really read it. So
success has created certain expectations within yourself
I think
that you have to sort of beat down on a regular basis.
I have to try to not think about it. Yes, I have to try not to think about it. So it's nice when you sort of get in a zone with the writing and you sort of forget anybody else will ever read it. That's helpful.
Right.
So no one else may ever read the next one. And what are you going to do? I didn't expect anyone to read this one either.
So,
The chances anyone will ever read anything are so slight that you just have to be grateful.
Say, if I'm lucky, I get to see you once a week when you stop by the store and
He has dog
Bring
biscuits, so
Charlie,
when I
yes,
take
yes.
walks with Charlie, Charlie likes to come in the direction of the bookstore.
every other visit I should say, Kim, no one's going to read your second book.
That would be so helpful. I would really appreciate it. That would be great. That would be great.
No, I'm not gonna. I'll just try not to pester you about where is your second book. That's what.
It's gay right away. Because this book, people pick it up, and it turns out the main character's lesbian, but it's like her girlfriend's away for most of it.
It's actually extraordinarily subtle in a sense.
It's just,
It's not a factor.
it's just, because some people ask me, like, why did you make her a lesbian? I was like, I don't know, people are. That's okay. Do you pick up most books and say, why did Gatsby like a girl? Like, well, yeah. So anyway, but there were a few people who picked it up because you can't tell. They didn't put like a rainbow warning sign on the cover. So people read it unexpectedly. And sort of the best result is, I talked to someone the other night in Harrisburg, and she said, a grown-up, well-read, educated person, she said, this is the first book I ever read with a gay protagonist. I thought, how does that
Sheltered life,
happen?
yeah, right.
And I think just, it used to be you had to find that shelf in the bookstore, and I think now it's a little more integrated.
And that is exactly why I always have problems with people asking for specialty categories in my store. Where are your LGBT titles? Where is your gay and lesbian fiction titles? And I don't want this label, please shelve within the gay, lesbian, because...
Well, and I think that's sort of dissipated out now, except for maybe
Right.
nonfiction.
No, and I have always worried about it, and I've actually discussed with African Americans this issue. I do not want to ghettoize. I don't want to put James Baldwin in a ghetto. Which ghetto would you like me to put him in? Black
The
writers?
Venetian Jewish
Gay
one.
writers? Yeah,
Is-
exactly
is-
right.
is
Yeah.
realistic.
Is this only for the Jewish Book Council? No. Is it
Yeah.
only for the gay lesbian readers? No. Is it only for the people who have trouble with their families? No. It's a universal appeal.
I hope so. And so that's been a really positive thing from it. So a few people get a bit scandalized, especially the ones who are not clued in. Because if you're kind of thinking about it, you start to pick up on it pretty soon. And if you're not, then all of a sudden you get a big surprise in a library restroom.
of all shady dives.
Of all the shady dives.
Yeah.
Yes. And so that's the point where people who like perhaps bought it at the Walmart in North Carolina unsuspectingly are like, what kind of book am I reading? So the one I'm reading now, I'm like, let's just have a guy pick up another guy, chapter 1, and I'm like, okay.
Which sooner or later,
stick with this book or not, but
you may have to have Teresa call you and say, does this work? Does this work? Why did you put this in now? That sort of thing. You may have to argue about a lot of these things down the road. So. I'm just
test it,
saying,
you mean.
I mean, that's a form of creation.
Yes.
That's a form of publishing.
But the editor at William Morrow was like super supportive the entire time. Nobody ever questioned it, and Target was into it, and so it's been sort of a non-issue. A benefit to being a very late bloomer. So if I had been like a precocious writer in my 20s, then I think that might have been more problematic. But I waited a long time.
It was.
Now
It is very sweet of Kim occasionally to send me on to links saying this reviewer on Amazon wrote, great book, except for that lesbian part. It's like, oh, you got it.
Which is the opposite of Jeff's reaction, which is always like, can you bookmark those lesbian pages for me, please? So I don't have to read the whole book again.
I did make one teasing reference to her when I said
He was very
that, that she had written probably the hottest lesbian scene that I've read in many years.
Not like we need to see his bookshop.
Not like I go out and
like,
search.
what is this up against?
But it's and I said that to tease her because it's not something she even regarded as quote unquote hot. It's just
I knew it was hot.
It's just extraordinarily lovely.
Yes.
Right.
No, I knew it was hot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
there you go. You're welcome.
You didn't feel offended that stop. Okay, identity politics. Don't do that.
No,
right.
You can have fun with that. That's what they're for.
Right.
Yes.
Which is not something I use when people come up to me and say, "Is this book any good?" I don't make a reference to that. I just.
There's a sexy part.
Yeah.
But those are, to be sort of weirdly honest, those are like really significant plot markers for me in this book, the little sexy moments, because those are when I'm thinking about my characters, these are moments where they're like most intensely in relation to one another in ways that are really significant to their choices in life and their sense of who they are and their character. So for me, those are really significant moments, and they actually move the plot as well because they motivate people and give them reasons to do the things they do. So those are really significant.
And they're not put in there as ends unto themselves. They're put in there in this web of relationships. And some of the relationships are very tense and have very conflicted feelings, and some of the relationships are the reader can take a breath almost and say,
there's nice people in the book.
there are nice people. It's
very
not
nice
all violence or sex and violence, and rock and roll. There's no rock and roll, but it's not that kind.
There's
of
a
book.
marching band.
But I didn't want to. I just am fascinated by this idea of knowing how sweet and tender-hearted and what a good person Kim is. I look back on her novel and thought, my goodness, she can write about violence, and she can write about sex, and she can write about, I'm thinking of all these interesting things that I don't see when you have Charlie Dragon.
There were horses in it.
Yes.
They died.
Remotely, yeah.
But
not good.
There were horses in it.
Okay.
Well, and I think just if you're a grown-up human person, you know about a lot more things, and I made something of an effort to get to a point where I'm a happy, nice person. So
You've worked at it.
I have actually worked at that. So yes, the writing is fun because you get to be like, ooh, I remember when I was intent on revenge. I can use that now instead of like trying to purge it from me in therapy.
And channel it safely
Yeah.
onto a page rather than
Yeah.
into the kitchen knife drawer or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you stumbled in here, some of you who we know and have read it, and some of you who we don't know. And
Questions?
I don't know. Yes, questions, or would you like to just know what this book is more about? Are you catching on, or would you like
We
to
haven't-
write?
We haven't given
Things in
away
it?
anything that would detract from the enjoyment of the book. I'm looking forward to rereading it actually,
Oh.
which I know would surprise Kim, since it took me so long to get started. But anyway, questions?
Yeah.
Questions for Kim at all? Come on, fellow professional.
We've talked about it a lot. Let me think of a question.
So, Kim, you
Yeah.
said that the final book, which of course is no surprise, is very different than what you sold the book originally. And you can talk a little bit about the process of adding, subtracting, and multiplying. How and did you actually consciously change the plot to make the doctor more of the antagonist as you went through more and more revisions?
Yeah, well,
Or did you just
I
have that
changed it
realization?
to develop that character and to develop those scenes. So once I realized that this was sort of the main conflict of the book, and once my editor said, we need more Dr. Solomon. So I learned more. I had to do some more research. I learned more about x-rays. I learned more about women doctors in the early 1900s and the medical profession in general. So I learned more stuff, and then I was able to go back and understand her character in a richer way so that they had more to do. They had more to talk about. And so I'm really glad about that. That was part of the revision. And then part of it too, it was structural. It used to be like, it used to start like, I'm Rachel Rabinowitz, a nurse bent on revenge with a pocket full of morphine, and tonight someone will die. And I thought that would be like so dramatic and tense. And then I realized that it doesn't give the reader anything to do. You're like, why am I going to spend a couple hundred pages with this person? So now it starts like, I'm Rachel, going to work. Oh, we have a new patient. Oh, she reminds me of someone. Oh, I think she was my doctor. What did my doctor do to me? What did my doctor do to me? Now I know what she did to me. Now I'm really mad at her. She should apologize. She won't apologize. What am I going to do about that? So it's like you get to have this experience with the character. So that was a big thing I learned in doing the rewrite.
A question.
Yeah.
You talked about the book you're writing now being much more out in the world, and whereas Orphan Number 8 was a lot of it set inside the orphanage or even inside a hospital.
Mhm.
How did you deal with the confines of the place? Because it reads in a very interesting, engaging way. The building itself maybe being a character, or how did you keep the story energetic while you had it in a place?
Well, I like the settings a lot, and again, I get really inspired by the research I do. It really helps me feel like I'm picturing a place that feels real in my imagination. So for this orphanage that's based on the Hebrew Orphan Asylum, I mean, I have at home a Xerox copy of the architect's handwritten prospectus for the building from 1880, where he describes like the fire escapes and the stairways and how many bathrooms it has and how it's all laid out. And then I've read a lot about how they lived in it and sort of would move through that space. So it gets to a point where it just seems like I can just go to it in my head. And then my characters just, you don't have to really explain it to the reader. We're just moving through a space, and I think then the reader just follows along because the characters seem to know where they're going. But I liked all those places. And so now that I have characters moving around out in the world, I'm taking out these subway maps from 1910 all the time because I'm like, what stop would he get off on the 3rd Avenue elevated train, and when did they build the elevated train? So for me, I really need a sense of reality, and maybe especially because it's historical, and I can't just look out the window and know how would you get to New York, and I have to look it up. And then once I get to a point where I feel pretty confident, then the character can just move through that space. I don't have to explain that space, and that's helpful for me. So yes, now my characters are like all around New York and going places.
You know you're reading a bad historical novel when you get the writer continually explaining.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because they're saying, I did all this research and you're going to live through it whether you like it or
Right,
not.
right.
Whereas Kim does her research so her characters can live in this space.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's so much easier. I mean, it's so much a better way to deliver the goods.
I like it. Yeah. I had a couple of paragraphs I lost out of the first chapter that I really resisted. My editor kept saying, so there's like a whole page of backstory on a character who's going to die in 5 pages. It's very confusing. The reader thinks, whose book am I reading? Am I going to read about this person? And I said, I read a 400-page book to write those 2 paragraphs, and Irving Howe, what's it called, The World of Our Fathers?
Yeah, World of Our Fathers.
World of Our Fathers, about the whole Lower East Side and the garment industry, and with a touch of sort of Tree Grows in Brooklyn, all this, and my editor's like,
No, don't do it.
they don't fit. So then I cut them out. But I cut out 3 paragraphs, and she said, oh no, put the pickles back in. Like, I like the pickle. So the pickles went back, and the garment workers came out. Thank you, Colleen, for stopping by. We'll see you later. Bye. Colleen has the book already. So, yes, thank you. I do a lot of research. And I'm super bad with dates and chronology, which makes me always very uncertain. I have to have big charts on my wall because I have a very hard time. It's difficult for me to conceptualize time just in my own life. Since my daughter graduated college, I have now no mark. I have no, for a long time when you have a kid, you can be like, that was 3rd grade. And you're like, I don't know what year 3rd grade was, but I know it was 3rd grade because it's so tactile. And now I have no idea how much time passes. So historical fiction's kind of a weird fit for me.
It's good for you because I'd rather have you worried about what year the L was built rather than what will my future readers think of this page.
Oh, good. I'll use it to distract myself.
I'm going to probably run downstairs now, but feel free to talk to Kim.
Yeah.
If you'd like to purchase any copies, you can just grab them, have her inscribe them, bring them downstairs. One last, this has been an amazing week in the Whistlestop's life. We had a open mic night for Dickinson Review. We have Kim today. On Thursday of next week, we will be supporting a poetry reading by a very talented young writer named Ross Gay. He's going to be at the Allison Community Hall, the old Allison Methodist Church, at 6:30 on Thursday. And on Friday, we're going to have a fellow Shippensburg professor,
fantastic poet.
Nicole Santa Lucia, or Santa Lucia? Santa Lucia is what I say. She has a book called Because I Did Not Die. She'll be here at the store in this room on Thursday night at,
Is it Friday night?
Friday night.
Yeah,
See, this is the complication with chronology.
yeah.
Thursday is Ross Gay. Friday is Nicole here at the store. I'm drawing a total blank. I think maybe it's the 5 to 6 period.
I think so.
5 to 6 period, and then you can all go out to dinner. And then Saturday, we also have a Carlisle product who went through Carlisle High School, taught at Carlisle High School, now lives in Mechanicsburg, because all the difference by Leah Ferguson, who has also had her debut novel published by Berkeley, major publisher. A lot of similarities to Kim's experience, actually, into having lightning strike twice within a few miles of each other. So she will be here next Saturday. So we have 3 author events next Saturday, back to back to back. And obviously you're all invited and welcome at all of them. Should be quite different experiences, actually, all 3, which will be fun. And then on December 3rd, we're getting the return of a very popular reader we had last fall, Megan Reedy, who used to teach classics of Dickinson. And she writes this wonderful small booklet installment series about a character named Apple Elder Rose and her adventures in the world. And she prints the books herself with a local letterpress printer. And they're beautiful little productions, and she's a very dynamic, charismatic reader. She'll be here on December 3rd. If you'd like, I expect you all, of course, to remember all of that. If both our website has all these events listed under the new events page, we do have a newsletter that we send out to people electronically, and our Facebook page.
Is that up to date finally? Facebook page.
Is all up to date.
Very good.
So check in, basically. The next 6 weeks are the busiest in the book industry. And we have lots of things going on, lots of great books. I expect this to
There's
be...
a Hanukkah scene. There's a really nice Hanukkah scene. So if you're thinking like, what to get? Because you have to get 8 things.
That's true.
So a paperback with a Hanukkah scene.
This book will be continually selling for years to come. It's been extraordinarily popular with reading groups.
Reading groups. Yes,
She's been
book clubs.
Skyping all over the world for this book. And you've got many translations, actually.
We just got Spanish.
Okay.
So that makes 11.
11 languages.
Yeah, 11 languages.
So talk to Kim, stay in touch
We
with
don't
her.
have French or German yet, though.
They'll come.
I know.
Well, they don't, you have to warn them. They're going to be bobbing along in the line of the movie rights at some point. So.
There's no movies.
No,
We hear nothing.
to come. Oddly enough, one little final detail, which I get questions about. There was a paperback original novel published 3 years before Kim's book called Orphan Train by a woman named Christina Klein.
Baker.
And sold extraordinarily well. And actually was a word-of-mouth, huge bestseller. The publisher was finally persuaded to also bring out a commemorative hardcover version of it. And I gather the movie rights to that have sold years down the road.
I think she's just started mentioning something about movie rights.
Right, that's I've heard rumors. This book has nothing to do with Orphan Train, which I have to explain to so many people.
But in a way, it does. So there's
that's
two
what I
things.
tell people.
There's
Right.
two things. First of all, Orphan Train was William Morrow, so they were like, "Ooh, orphans."
We're on a theme here.
We like orphans. In fact, they said to me, "We like orphans at William Morrow," and it is the same time period. So it's sort of
Same
like, what
time
do
period.
you do with kids if their parents can't take care of them? And one big institution, fund it really well, run it efficiently, and the others put them on trains and send them to farms. What could happen? Farms are good. So they go together, but they're different books.
Yeah, different books. This is not a sequel, as I've had to explain to some people. Orphan Train, big wide open spaces, big wide open issues, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
Orphan number 8, small, interesting, intimate spaces, and intense, super personal relationships.
It's a little darker than
A
Orphan
little
Train.
darker than Orphan Train, right? But that's reflecting the darkness that resides.
The darkness that I have so cleverly learned to mask.
That she
That's
so
right.
well finds. But thank you all very much
Thank
for
you,
coming.
guys.
Thanks to
I
Greg.
hope you like this interview chat format we
Right.
tried today.
It's an experiment. But that's mostly because whenever Kim comes in, we enjoy each other's company so much, we thought, oh, what the heck?
We'll just talk.
Just make everybody else listen.
There you go.
And Greg Bear is filming it for us, which he will edit into something that will go viral on YouTube. And he did not take any pictures of you, I believe, so you're all free from that.
No releases necessary.
But I gather Mulan is in the video.
Mulan is in the video. She's very clever. She stole her scene. Well, thank you all
Yes.
so much for
Thank
coming.
you
And
all
he'll turn
very
it off
much
so
for
you
coming.
won't wander in front of the frame anymore.